Welcome to the deep dive. So if you're getting ready for your PEDS rotation, or maybe you just need a quick way to really get the essentials for the school-age child, well, this deep dive is basically your cheat sheet.
That's right. We're really zeroing in on ages 6 to 12 today. This is a time when the child's world just fundamentally shifts. Physical growth actually slows down a bit.
Yeah, it's not like infancy.
Not at all. But the acceleration in cognitive, social, and moral complexity, it's absolutely massive.
It really is the era of that great gravitational shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
The child's focus moves so dramatically outward, away from just the family.
Exactly. Towards peers, teachers, other external influences like media become much bigger.
So our mission today is pretty clear then. We're going to distill those key physiological benchmarks, unpack the big developmental theories, Erikson, Piaget,
Are
Kohlberg,
you the core ones?
and, really crucially, synthesize the clinical guidance nurses need to promote health and safety during this really foundational period.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the physical body. It's defined by, like you said, a slower, progressive march towards maturity. We're talking steady numbers here, right?
Yeah.
A real contrast.
Exactly. For listeners tracking the metrics, we see an average of about 6 to 7 centimeters, that's around 2.5 inches, in height gained each year.
Okay.
And that's coupled with a weight gain of, say, 3 to 3.5 kilograms or 7 pounds annually. They tend to get longer, leaner.
And I noticed the source points out that later on, maybe around 10 or 11, girls often start to surpass boys in height and weight.
Yeah, that happened.
Which leads directly to a really crucial nursing point, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It introduces this whole concept of managing, mismatched expectations.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you have an 8-year-old who's physically the size of an 11-year-old,
Right.
that child still processes information, handles stress with the emotional capacity of an 8-year-old. So if adults have unrealistic expectations based just on their size, it can really crush their self-esteem, their sense of competence. It's so vital to assess the child's stage of development, not just their physical size.
That's a critical distinction. Beyond just height and weight, we see all the internal systems kind of settling into a more stable rhythm.
Yeah.
What's the clinical takeaway from that physiological maturing?
Well, the big takeaway is that we're generally moving out of that period of super frequent acute infections you see in younger kids. The neurological system, for instance, is largely complete by age 10.
Wow, by 10.
Yeah, and respiratory rates decrease. Importantly, the respiratory system itself matures, which means fewer infections overall. The frontal sinuses, for example, are developed by age 7.
Okay. And we also see the cardiovascular system maturing, like blood pressure goes up, pulse comes down.
Correct. BP increases, pulse rate decreases, gets steadier.
Mm.
But maybe the most visible change, the chaos, is happening right in their mouth.
Ah, yes, the great tooth turnover.
That's it. They lose all 20 of those primary teeth and gain up to 32 permanent ones eventually. And meanwhile, the genitourinary system is maturing too, signaled by increased bladder capacity.
Is there a way to estimate that?
There is, actually, a useful little formula. Age in years plus 2 ounces. It's a practical metric for nurses assessing IO.
Good tip. So this steady path then hits a kind of predictable curve right before adolescence, right?
Yeah.
Prepubescence, usually ages 10 to 12.
Exactly. And this 2-year window right before puberty kicks in is so critical for anticipatory guidance.
Why is that?
Because secondary sexual characteristics start appearing. This often brings a rapid growth spurt, especially for girls. We really need to educate both the child and the parents about these normal body changes.
So they're not caught off guard.
Right. Because early development in girls, or maybe delayed development in boys, can cause significant emotional distress.
Mm-hmm.
Low self-esteem, even risk-taking behaviors if it's not handled with open communication and support.
That physical self-awareness, especially the stress around prepubescence, must feed directly into the big emotional and social task they're facing. Let's look at Erikson. His task for this age group is industry versus inferiority.
Yes. This is the time when the child's sense of self-worth becomes fundamentally tied to their ability to do things, to produce, to master skills, and, importantly, to be recognized for their efforts.
So industry is that feeling of competence they get from succeeding.
Exactly. Succeeding in activities could be at home, school, sports, community stuff. It builds that feeling of, I can do this.
And the flip side, inferiority.
That comes if they experience repeated failures, or if they don't get enough support from key people, parents, teachers, to master those tasks. It fosters this deep sense of incompetence. Success in something, anything really, is critical for building that foundation.
Makes sense. Okay, moving to Piaget. Cognitively, we're firmly in the concrete operational stage now, right? Roughly 7 to 11 years.
That's the one. They're moving away from purely magical or egocentric thinking. They can start to assimilate information, coordinate it, and crucially, see things from another person's viewpoint.
And this more logical thinking leads to that classic cognitive leap, the principle of conservation.
Oh, this is a massive shift. They finally get that matter doesn't change in quantity just because its shape changes.
Like the classic water glass experiment.
Precisely. Pour the same amount of juice into a tall, thin glass, and then a short, wide one. They now know it's the same amount.
It's not just a party trick, though.
Not at all. This ability to understand fixed quantities is like the root of more abstract thinking later on. It means they can grasp concepts like the value of money, why safety rules need consistency, why fair play matters.
And it probably drives that interest in collecting things, too, right? Classifying, ordering their world.
Absolutely. It's all part of making sense of the world in a more logical, concrete way.
And this growing mental sophistication, it must impact their moral compass, too. Kohlberg puts them in the conventional stage. It seems like the big shift is from just avoiding punishment to genuinely understanding right and wrong.
That's a really good way to frame it. In stage 3, that's for the younger school-ager, maybe 7 to 10.
Okay.
They operate on interpersonal conformity. Basically, follow the rules because the adult says so, and they want to be seen as the good child. Avoiding the punishment is key.
But then there's a shift within that stage.
Yes. By 10 to 12 years, they usually move into stage 4, which Kohlberg called law and order. Now, the big change is they judge actions based on intention, not just the consequence.
Ah, okay. So accidentally breaking something versus doing it on purpose matters now.
Exactly. They understand the difference in intent. This is also where they start to internalize the golden rule. They get that roles exist to maintain social order, which is a huge step towards empathy.
Okay, let's quickly touch on motor and sensory development. Gross motor skills, biking, sports, they get much better.
Highly improved, yeah. And fine motor skills, like writing or playing an instrument, get refined too. That's due to ongoing myelinization in the central nervous system.
And sensory.
We really need to stress the sensory system. All senses are mature pretty early in the stage. That's why vision and hearing screenings are so important.
Right, catching things early.
Especially conditions like amblyopia, lazy eye. Early detection is paramount because treatment success really drops off if it's not caught young.
Got it. So the school-age child's emotional life is also heavily influenced by their expanding social world. Let's talk temperament first. How does their inherent style affect our care?
Well, temperament, their basic behavioral style, whether they're generally easy, slow to warm up, or maybe more difficult, it means we have to adjust our expectations and approach.
Like how?
For a slow to warm child in the clinic, for example, we need to allow time for them to adjust. We can't just force a quick interaction. And importantly, if their innate temperament clashes with parental expectations, it can severely impact their self-esteem.
And self-esteem, the source really emphasizes, is directly built by that positive feedback from parents and teachers, right?
Directly. It's so sensitive to that external validation at this age.
And their anxieties seem to mature right along with them. Fears shift from, like, fantasy monsters
Yeah, less about monsters under the bed.
to more real-world threats.
Absolutely. Now they worry about things like kidnapping, natural disasters, maybe the death of a parent or loved one. These are, concrete, heavy anxieties.
So the nursing guidance isn't to just dismiss the fear.
No, definitely not. You have to validate it, reassure the child that the fear is normal, listen with real sympathy.
But then what?
But the key intervention is teaching active coping strategies. Things like positive self-talk, I can handle this, or relaxation techniques like deep breathing, visualization. We acknowledge the feeling, but we also empower them to manage it.
That makes sense. Empowering them. Okay, the peer group. The influence here feels tectonic.
It really is. Peers become this kind of security blanket almost that allows the child to start pulling away a bit, seeking more independence from parents.
And those relationships shape their self-concept.
Hugely. Same-sex peers are usually the preference, and these groups are where they learn a lot about social rules, acceptance, belonging.
And we can't forget the school environment itself.
Absolutely not. Teachers and the school setting, really second only to the family, exert this profound influence on their socialization, their attitudes, their values. As nurses, we have to see the school as a primary partner in the child's health.
Okay, let's pivot now to the more clinical guidance part of our deep dive. Starting with what feels like a major challenge in this age group, nutritional health. We're talking diagnoses like ineffective child eating dynamics or risk for overweight.
Yeah, this is a big one. The clinical goal is all about maintaining a healthy BMI, specifically keeping it between the 5th and 85th percentile for their age and sex. We know obesity rates are a concern.
Definitely.
So intervention has to be practical and really family-centered.
And it involves giving the child some control, right? Because they're concrete thinkers now.
Exactly. Interventions need to include assessing their knowledge, what do they know about healthy food, plotting their BMI accurately on the growth charts, and, crucially, involving them in meal planning, maybe even grocery shopping.
Makes it feel less like something being done to them.
Right. But honestly, the most effective intervention often cited for preventing obesity is actually decreasing sedentary activity,
So limiting screen time.
limiting TV, computer, video game time. It's about increasing caloric expenditure. And just as a baseline reminder, 4 to 8-year-olds generally need about 1,400 to 1,600 calories, while older boys, say 9 to 13, need more like 1,800 to 2,200, depending on how active they are.
Good benchmarks.
Okay.
Moving to the leading cause of death in this age group, unintentional injuries. That increased independence must translate directly into a higher risk for injury.
It does. And here's where anticipatory guidance becomes absolutely critical with some very specific metrics. Number 1, children must ride in the rear seat of the vehicle.
Always in the back.
Always. And they need a belt positioning booster seat until they hit 144.8 centimeters or 4 feet 9 inches tall.
That's very specific. Why that height?
Because that specific height ensures the vehicle's lap belt lies low across the upper thighs, not the abdomen, and the shoulder belt lies snug across the shoulder and chest, not the neck. It's a key safety point, often tested. And critically, no child under 13 should ever ride in the front seat because of the risk from airbags.
Okay, clear rules there.
Yeah.
And for the active school-ager, the biker, the skater.
Helmets. CPSC or Snell-approved, well-fitting helmets are just non-negotiable for all-wheeled sports bikes, scooters, skating, you name it.
And bike fit matters too, right?
Yes, the bike needs to be the right size. The child should be able to plant both feet flat on the ground when straddling the center bar. And quickly on firearm safety.
Yes.
The guidance is simple but life-saving. Teach children never to touch guns they might find. And in the home, any firearms must be stored unloaded, locked up, with ammunition stored separately and also locked.
Okay, let's talk discipline. Since they're in that concrete operational stage, discipline needs to evolve beyond just timeouts, doesn't it?
It really should. They understand cause and effect much more clearly now. So discipline works best when it uses natural consequences, like if you throw your toy, you lose the toy for a bit.
Makes sense.
Or logical consequences, if you don't put your bike away like you were asked, you don't get to ride it for the rest of the day. The key for parents is consistency, being positive role models, and really avoiding belittling the child. That just damages the self-esteem we talked about.
Right, it all connects. And just a quick note on promoting other health practices. Sleep, for instance.
Yeah, sleep needs decrease slightly, but routines are still super important. 6 to 8-year-olds need around 12 hours a night.
Still quite a bit.
Yep. And the older kids, 10 to 12-year-olds, need more like 9 to 10 hours. Consistent schedules, wind-down routines before bed, those are still paramount.
Okay. And finally, dental health. Still
Yeah.
a major issue.
It is. Dental caries, cavities, remain the most common chronic disease in this population. We have to emphasize that kids actually need physical help with brushing until they're about 7 to 10 years old. Their manual dexterity just isn't quite there yet.
Good point.
And promote fluoridated toothpaste, daily flossing, super important now with permanent teeth coming in regular dental checkups, and talk about sealants to protect the chewing surfaces of those new molars.
Okay. Now, in this digital age, we absolutely have to address media and screen time. It's a huge concern, right? Impacting sleep, weight, maybe even school performance.
It's a massive concern. The guidance is pretty strict, following the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations. Parents must establish consistent limits both on the amount of time and the type of content.
So setting clear rules.
Clear rules, yes. Having designated media-free times, like during family meals, is important, and ensuring no internet-connected devices are kept in the bedrooms overnight. That's a big one for sleep hygiene.
And monitoring.
Absolutely. Parental monitoring and ideally co-viewing sometimes, so parents can actually talk about what kids are seeing online or in games, help them process difficult content.
Right. Okay, shifting to some common behavioral concerns. How do nurses guide parents dealing with things like, say, stealing or lying?
Well, first, it's important to acknowledge that younger kids in this range, maybe 6 to 8, might not fully grasp concepts like ownership or property rights yet.
Oh, okay.
And lying is often, especially in younger kids, kind of an immature attempt to avoid consequences, not necessarily malicious deceit. Parents need to confront the behavior calmly, openly, and consistently apply consequences that are appropriate, proportionate, not harsh, and certainly not damaging to their self-esteem.
But what if it persists, especially in older kids?
Yeah, persistent lying, cheating, or stealing in older school-age children might indicate deeper underlying issues. That might warrant a professional mental health evaluation.
Okay. And bullying. The text defines it as repeated aggression with a power imbalance. It sounds like it's not just a discipline issue. The source notes risks for both the bully and the victim.
Absolutely. It's a serious issue with potential long-term mental health consequences for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Our intervention has to be collaborative, involving parents, the child, the school.
What can parents do?
For the child being victimized, parents can role-play scenarios to build coping skills, work on boosting their self-esteem. For the child who is bullying, parents need to help them develop empathy, teach appropriate ways to express anger, maybe use positive reinforcement for nonviolent conflict resolution.
And schools.
Schools play a huge role. Implementing proven programs like the Olvius Bully Prevention Program mentioned in the text can be really effective when done school-wide. It requires a systemic approach.
Got it. Okay, one last common concern. The idea of the latchkey child coming home from school to an empty house.
Right. The key thing here is that maturity, not just age, is the deciding factor.
So it's not like there's a magic age.
No. While some very mature kids might handle it okay by 8 or 10, most children probably aren't really ready for that kind of unsupervised time until they're closer to 11 or 12.
And if it is necessary.
The nurses need to ensure parents implement really strict safety rules. Things like having emergency numbers posted clearly, strict instructions about not answering the door or the phone, or at least not revealing their home alone, and absolutely no accessible firearms in the home. Backup plans are essential too.
Okay, that was a really comprehensive deep dive into the world of the school-age child.
Wow.
We covered that shift from, slower physical growth to that explosion in psychosocial development.
Yeah, the emergence of industry, that concrete thinking taking hold.
And the huge influence of peers and all those external forces.
And we detailed the nurse's crucial role in anticipatory guidance. Everything from nailing down the precise car seat safety rules and promoting dental health.
To managing media use and helping families navigate those complex behavioral concerns like bullying, really collaboratively.
Exactly.
So for you, our dedicated listener, here's maybe a final thought to kind of mull over as you integrate this. Given that profound influence of peers and media in this age group, and, the reality that direct parental control naturally decreases a bit,
It does.
how can you as the nurse most effectively leverage those community and school partnerships, really to promote the long-term health goals? Things like physical activity, good nutrition. How do you make sure those efforts stick beyond just the family unit?
That's a great question to consider as you move forward in your studies and your practice.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really appreciate you being part of our little last-minute lecture family. We'll catch you on the next one.